Hello, my name is Angie Busick, and I am the Vice Chair of Legislative Affairs Committee for the Greater Williamsburg Chamber and Tourism Alliance Business Council. And I'm with Tom Cosgrove, who is the Vice Chair of the Virginia Peninsula Chamber of Commerce. And we are delighted today to have Congressman Wittman, who is the incumbent candidate for the 1st Congressional District of the U.S. House of Representatives. Welcome so much, Congressman. We appreciate you being here today.
Thank you. Great to be with you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Sure. We have 5 questions that we'll be asking you today about health, transportation, military, economy, and the military. Did I say military?
Workforce.
Workforce, that's
Workforce.
right. But before we start, if you would just take a couple of minutes to share with our viewers a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, I'm Rob Wittman. I represent the 1st Congressional District in the United States Congress, and I have served there since 2007. I serve on the House Armed Services Committee. I am the ranking member on the Sea Power and Projection Forces Subcommittee. I also serve on the Committee on Natural Resources, and I serve on the Wildlife and Oceans Subcommittee. I've served in government since 1986, from the local level to the state level, and now in Washington.
That's great.
Well, thank you, Congressman, for joining us today. And to kick off the questions, we're going to start by talking about defense and the military. And certainly we don't need to explain the role that the defense industry plays in our regional economy. During his 2016 campaign, then candidate Trump advocated for what he termed a great rebuilding of the armed services. And since getting elected, he's approved budget deals with defense spending well over $700 billion. So a multi-part question here. Regardless of the outcome of this year's presidential race, would you support the continuation of the current efforts to rebuild the armed services? If so, how would that be funded given the increasing cost of military personnel and acquisitions? Or if not, where would you see cuts in the defense budget and how would you reprioritize?
Well, as a Republican leader on the Sea Power and Projection Forces Subcommittee, I have the true privilege of fighting to give our men and women in uniform what they need on a daily basis. And we've seen readiness shortfalls have led to insufficient time and resources to train sailors and maintain their ships. And we've seen that contribute to several accidents, including fatal collisions on board the USS Fitzgerald and the USS McCain. And listen, I refuse to deprive our men and women in uniform of the resources that they need to be successful in their missions. We have to do this. The Constitution is pretty clear. It provides that Congress has to, as its first responsibility, provide for the common defense. And for 60 years, members of both parties have put our troops first and politics second. That is, they've come together to make sure we pass the National Defense Authorization Act. And that's because national defense is a must-pass and must-fund priority. And we have to ensure, I believe, that we're adequately addressing the growing global threats that we see around us and continuing the progress we've made in improving military readiness. In fact, just this month, my opponent referred to rebuilding of our military under President Trump as massive and unnecessary increase in defense spending. Listen, I fundamentally disagree. And it shows that my opponent isn't aware of what our adversaries are capable of. We have to have a military that not only projects power around the globe, but I believe one that's fully prepared to take on the challenges we ask of them in order to keep our nation secure. In July, the House voted on an amendment that would reduce the overall defense spending level by 10%. It failed. It failed on a vote of 93 to 324, and no Virginia member voted for it. Why? Because cuts to our defense would endanger innocent American lives, and it makes our country more vulnerable. I believe that a strong national defense is important. It's critical to keep our nation safe. It's also important to the economy of Virginia. As we've seen the increase in spending, some of that's gone to a new Virginia-class submarine built right there in Newport News. It's also gone to raises for our men and women in the military. Those men and women that serve in our region, from places like Langley Air Force Base to Norfolk Naval Facility, all of those impact our economy. We need to make sure we're doing everything we can to support our men and women in uniform, give them the resources they need to make sure that they can fight to victory and come home safe when we call upon them to do things in these very, very difficult situations in dangerous places around the world. Virginia plays a critical role there. We're blessed to have these men and women in uniform that are stationed here in Virginia that do such a great job. And let's not forget, too, the civilian workforce here that build the ships, that maintain the ships, that support our military. They are all critically important members of those teams. We have to make sure we are supporting them. These increased dollars go to modernizing the military. They go to paying our men and women in the military, and that's what makes a difference with our force. And they make sure, too, that we can keep up with our adversaries. Because let me tell you, the thing that keeps me up at night are the capabilities that our adversaries have and the things that they can do and the places where we have to catch up if we expect to maintain a peaceful world.
Congressman, under the assumption that we would have a vaccine for COVID-19 by the end of the year, what 2 or 3 things do you think that Virginia ought to be doing, since we all seem to be maybe on a level playing field due to the virus? What should Virginia be doing to accelerate out of the gate, so to speak, and thrive? And what should the business leaders be doing so that Virginia becomes a role model for a quick and successful recovery in the economy?
Well, we've seen the impact that COVID-19 has had on families and on businesses. It has changed things immensely. There's some areas of the economy that are doing well, others that are struggling, and we have to do everything we can to make sure the economy continues to open up. How do we do that? We have to support our small businesses and prepare potential employees to fill the jobs as they become available. I think there's going to be a giant change in the workforce, but we have to make sure we're focusing on policies that help us to create more jobs, that'll spur growth and innovation, and put more money into the pockets of hardworking Virginians. And we can do this by continuing to incentivize rehiring, make sure we remove regulatory barriers to job creation. And as we've seen, we have to return supply chain back from China to the United States. As opposed to my opponent, who in his Democrat candidates forum during this year's primary stated that capitalism is not the answer. Listen, I believe government's role should be to eliminate barriers to success, not to create them. In addition, my opponent says that we should consider a universal income and a jobs guarantee. Now, listen, I have no idea how that's going to be done or how it's going to be paid for. Instead, I believe we have to prioritize workforce development. We have to continue to promote career and technical education and STEM programs, because I know that's going to better prepare our future workforce with the necessary skills that are going to be necessary to compete in a global economy. We know that the jobs of the future can require a wide skill set. We know that 60% of those jobs will not require a 4-year degree, but will require a certification or credential. And therefore, we have to help schools create partnerships with our business community. We want to make sure students can cultivate the skills that are in demand by the labor market. Let's have it a labor market driven situation, not a situation where we are taking other turns and creating a mismatch between the workforce and the demands within the business sector. I think we can better prepare our professionals of tomorrow by increasing access to things like dual enrollment for CTE training. We can do that and help high school students work towards their credential while they're in high school, get that on-the-job training, which many of them lack, and it's difficult to transition from high school to the workforce. I think that if you take less than 2 years, or sometimes maybe even a few weeks to complete these qualifications, it provides a more tangible approach to education. And I think it's going to qualify our students for higher paying jobs and for a better trajectory on a career path. In fact, I'm a proud co-sponsor of the BUILDS Act, and that provides federal grants to develop a skilled workforce to support transportation industry. These funds are going to strengthen our workforce training programs and infrastructure, and I believe we're going to do that by creating critical partnerships that will exist between schools and local businesses and industry organizations. And again, they will formulate what needs to happen with curriculum, and they should be too part of the instructional force within those schools to make sure those students are getting the training that they need for the jobs of tomorrow. We have to do all of these things, I believe, to make sure we have a workforce that has a skill set matching the demand in the workforce. And as I've said, with COVID-19 and how the workforce is going to regenerate itself, we're going to see larger changes, I think, in the next 12 months than we've seen in the past 12 years for a variety of reasons, mostly because we see with people working virtually, we see certain areas of the economy are doing very well. Certain parts of the economy are transitioning. How do we make sure we get the workforce to have the right fit to the demands in the business sector? As I talk to businesses across the district, the number one issue they ask about is workforce, making sure they have the necessary workforce with the necessary skills to be successful. I think that's the key to success for the future.
Thank you, Congressman. And I think you just answered two questions in one. So our next topic was supposed to move on to workforce, and I will share that question. If you have anything you want to add on, certainly you're welcome to, but you might have covered it all in your previous answer, which is fine also. But we were going to come and talk about the Workforce Investment and Opportunity Act, which is due to be reauthorized in 2021. And ask about what you see as some of the current challenges and successes under WIOA and any changes to the policy that you would prioritize in reauthorization.
Well, WIOA is critically important, making sure that we're investing in our workforce. And it has several different levels to it. First of all, is making sure that our secondary school systems are set up to make sure there's equal tracks for career and technical education as there are for college track. And I believe the conversations need to take place at the middle school level with parents and their students about which opportunities they would like to pursue. And I want to make sure too that parents know, where are the jobs? Where can my child be successful? Where can they get the instruction that they need to make sure that they're on the path to success? Listen, the Carl D. Perkins Career and Technical Education Act is a critical part of that. As I talked about earlier, the BUILDS Act, that is going to create partnerships between schools, local businesses, and industry organizations as it relates to the transportation sector. These are all things that we can do to make sure that we are providing opportunities for our students to make sure they get that specialized instruction for them to be successful. We have to also make sure that parents understand that their child can be as successful in a career and technical education path as they can on a college track. In fact, we know that in the future, that 60% of the new jobs are actually going to be in the areas that require a certification or credential, not a college degree. Students and their parents need to know that. There needs to be transparency too, so that parents can know that if their child does go to college and gets a degree, let's say in an area like biology, how many of those degrees are being issued by the university? How many of their students are being employed with those degrees? And what are their students receiving in salaries for their degrees? Because all of these educational elements are about making an investment from the parent in their child's education. We want to make sure we understand what's the return on investment. And that makes sure that we have a level playing field between the opportunities for students that pursue a certification or credential through a career and technical education program versus a student that goes to college and gets a 4-year degree. So I think those are things that we can do to make sure that we have the workforce necessary for the future, making sure that we are investing in what our secondary schools are doing, make sure too we're investing so that our students can get an opportunity to pursue a career and technical education path. One of the bills that I put in is to make sure that you can use Pell Grants to pay for a career and technical education, because now you can only use it for 4-year or 2-year degrees. I think that that's critically important to make sure that students have the opportunity to leverage those dollars. That's another way that we can do that. Also, I have a bill that I've co-sponsored with a number of members of Virginia, Representative Spanberger, that's going to allow 529 savings accounts to cover the cost of certain workforce training programs and credentialing programs. So again, it doesn't have to be a 4-year or 2-year degree track. It can be for certification or credential. Those are the ways that we allow students to set aside money and their parents to set aside money, that they can also use Pell Grants in ways that are going to make sure they get the skills and the knowledge and abilities necessary for the jobs of the future.
Great, thank you. Two-part on healthcare. First, do you support or oppose repealing the Affordable Care Act? And the second part of that is, regardless of that position, what specific ideas do you have to expand access to healthcare, keeps the costs down, and ensure that the delivery system for healthcare is financially sustainable?
Well, before I came to Congress, I worked in public health with the Virginia Department of Health for 26 years and have a master's degree in public health. And if anything, we've seen the COVID-19 outbreak really underscores the importance of not only focusing on public health, but also the need to fix our broken healthcare system. Listen, I believe every American has the right to access affordable and comprehensive health coverage, not only for themselves and their families, but today, listen, families are struggling to do so. As I talk to them across the district, it's one of the big issues that they face. Obamacare has failed to deliver on its promises. They said you could keep your doctor if you liked your doctor, but instead physician choice disappeared. They said it would lower costs, but instead premium costs have skyrocketed. We need solutions that prioritize the interest of the patients, not the government. And unfortunately, my opponent is pushing for Medicare for All, which is a complete government takeover of healthcare. Under the Medicare for All plan, health insurance, private health insurance would be illegal. That's 158 million Americans who would be forced to give up their plans. That's just mind-boggling. And what else is included in this $32 trillion bill? It's going to increase taxes on working class Americans. It's going to allow coverage for illegal immigrants that don't pay into the system. And it's going to eliminate programs for seniors and people with disabilities, programs that they rely upon, programs that have really worked. Instead, I believe individuals and families must have the ability to make decisions for themselves based on what best fits their needs and their wants and their budget, not something that's dictated by the government. We have to make sure that we ensure the public can access coverage. We want to make sure it's affordable. We want to make sure that they're protected to be able to purchase coverage regardless of pre-existing conditions. You should also have an option to see the doctor of your choice. You have a relationship with your doctor. You should be able to continue that relationship. If you have health insurance that you like, you should be able to keep it. You shouldn't now be told private health insurance is illegal. The system, I believe, needs to be a patient-provider-centered system, not one that's dictated by the government. I think choice plays a big role there. I think, too, those elements will help us to drive down cost, making sure that there's competition in the marketplace, making sure that insurance can be sold across state lines. Again, choice and opportunities for patients and providers, I believe, are the way to get us to the point to be able to drive down cost for the healthcare system and to make sure that patients get what they need, and they do that in consultation with their provider, not the government dictating what should happen.
Thank you. And our final question today on the topic of transportation. We have a very complicated transportation management system that covers public transit, airports, ports, roads, bridges, tunnels, interstates, all of that, governed by any number of organizations, from authorities to local, state, and federal government organizations, and even some private entities. The disparate governance and funding streams impede efforts to provide quality and efficient transportation systems. And so to address these challenges, particularly as localities and regions expand into mega regions, how do we create a structure where all the puzzle pieces fit into an interwoven and more functional system?
Well, certainly the 1st Congressional District of Virginia is a great example about how there are a variety of very unique transportation challenges. And they're multimodal, whether it's the Port of Virginia, whether it's I-64, whether it's I-95, whether it's rail. We see all of those elements, and we face systems that are strained. The rail system is strained. We see crumbling roads and bridges. Bridges are a big, big deal. We see, though, in Hampton Roads, some pretty innovative ways to be able to come up with the resources. The biggest transportation project in the history of Virginia is the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel replacement. And I believe that we can do just that in how we invest in a 21st century infrastructure. An important component of that is not only addressing what's happening with roads, but also making sure we look at rail. How do we reduce congestion by having an effective commuter rail system, which also helps in freight rail? One of those elements is the Long Bridge. And folks think, well, what is the Long Bridge, which goes across the Potomac River from Virginia to DC? What does that have to do with Hampton Roads in the lower part of the district? That area is actually a critical gateway between Southeast and Northeast rail networks. And the current structure limits the Virginia Railway Express's ability to operate more passenger trains that could significantly reduce traffic in Northern Virginia on I-95. That's why I introduced the Long Bridge Act of 2020. A new Long Bridge is going to ease congestion along the 95 corridor, especially in the Northern Virginia area. And it's going to cut down on commuter travel time that plagues many first District Virginia residents. And the construction of this passenger-only bridge is going to allow freight to move more freely from the Port of Virginia, since there'll be now two separate bridges, and it's going to take thousands of large trucks off Virginia roadways. In addition, it's going to enhance the opportunities for the Port of Virginia. As we know, the port is one of the Commonwealth's most powerful economic engines, and it's right there in the heart of Hampton Roads. We see the improvements that have taken place on the rail system there. The key is how do we make sure not only do we get rail moving east-west, but how do we get it moving north-south? We can also help this by, again, the multimodal part, widening and deepening the channel there for the Port of Virginia. This is going to allow larger ships that are visiting the port there to arrive and depart fully loaded, and allow us to have Panamax ships come in, which will carry even more containers. This is going to make for a safer, I believe, and a more timely passage through the channels there. It's also going to allow American businesses from across the country to further benefit from the Port of Virginia. Right now, we see it goes all the way to the Midwest. This is going to let us serve the entire Eastern Seaboard. It really increases the economic opportunity for the region. And I believe within that realm that the role of the federal government is not to dictate what to build, but I think it has to provide stable long-term funding to states for their road project priorities. We've seen a great success in the I-64 project. I mean, if you go through the Hampton Roads area, think about the tremendous impact that has made. What we have to do now is to make sure that we connect that lane expansion from now just outside Richmond to the Williamsburg area at the 199 exit. That should be the next step to make sure we are building the transportation system necessary for the region. And listen, I'm going to continue to fight for these projects, and I'm going to make sure we prioritize innovation and think about different ways to do things, leverage public-private partnerships, things we've seen happen there in the 1st Congressional District, both in the Hampton Roads region and in the Northern Virginia region. And we have to do that by and also make sure we focus, I should say, on the safety of motorists within the region, and making sure we look at all modes of transportation, because it's going to take a comprehensive solution to make sure we have what we need for a 21st century transportation system.
Very good. Well, thank you, Congressman Wittman, for being with us today. On behalf of our 3 chamber sponsors, Angie and I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us, and we look forward to sharing this with the entire Peninsula business community.
Well, Tom and Angie, thank you all so much. I really appreciate the opportunity, and whatever our office can do to help, please let us know. It's been exciting to be involved in all of the efforts and projects that are going on, and to make sure we're staying up to date on what's happening, both with the Port of Virginia, but also too there in the I-64 corridor and I-664. It's amazing what's going on in the region. So you all have really been forward thinking there in the chamber and making sure that we're doing everything possible. I know from the chamber standpoint, it's critically important that we continue the I-64 expansion project from the 199 exit towards Richmond, because I know that that's another throttling point that has a significant impact on Williamsburg area. So we want to make sure that that's next on the priority list. And I have had great conversations with Secretary of Transportation Valentine within the state of Virginia to make sure we're doing everything we can to highlight that project, and wherever we can to help get federal funds to leverage for that project. So we're going to do everything we can to make sure that that project gets completed.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Sure. Well, thank you all so much. Thanks again for the opportunity.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you.